We're here to build your dream team, building futures, that's our theme. Key Tech Talks will show the way, with Key Global, spread your wings.
Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome once again to another live stream. This one is Key Tech Talk starring Lauren Halket, where we talk about everything and all things neurodivergent, especially within the workplace. Today we have a special guest, Abi Lemon, who is in fact an ADHD coach, and Lauren will be quizzing her on the whys and wherefores. So therefore I'm going to throw, as is traditional, Lauren straight under the bus.
Thank you, Gareth. And yeah, welcome, Abi. Thank you so much for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
No problem. No problem. So I suggest that we just dive straight into it and ask you, a quick question.
Go for it. Go for it.
Neurodiversity in the workplace. So how do you think recruiters can better identify and support neurodivergent talent during the hiring process?
Okay, so for me, it starts at the very beginning of the hiring process, and that's with the job advert. Too many job adverts that I've seen, and I've got a background in recruitment actually, so I've worked in recruitment for a while. Too many job adverts are too vague with their wording. They have things in there like, detail, or must be detail orientated, must be a good must be a people person, must have good communication skills, must be a strong multitasker, things like that are really quite ambiguous and actually can deter what might be some really good candidates who have ADHD or autism or other neurodivergence from applying because they think, because of my ADHD, I'm definitely not detail orientated. I better not apply for that, But actually, what is meant by detail orientated might be very different to what is kind of understood by the candidate. The thing is with neurodivergent brains is, especially with ADHD specifically, which is my own particular flavor of neurodivergence, we need some clarity and certainty around everything, around what's being said. And when the wording isn't clear, it immediately kind of throws that, that kind of safety aspect off a little bit. And we think, actually, no, that's not for me. That's not for me. So it could be losing out on some really good people just by thinking about perhaps what that wording might be on the job advert.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I get that. I don't know whether you get that, Abi, but yeah, absolutely. I think if things aren't clear, then, you're constantly just, kind of building up that anxiety. You become anxious and that pressure almost just, gets on top. It's just too much.
Yeah, absolutely. And that all starts with just having some kind of clarity and certainty around things and wording and language is really important for that. And it's not just the job ad. Obviously, that's the very beginning of it. You've got to also look at things like, okay, so when they send their CV into you, if they decide to apply, what happens next? Clear on your website what the process is, and actually does that actually happen? Because the amount of times when I was in recruitment many years ago that candidates would say, I sent my CV for this but no one ever came back to me. I had an interview for this but no, they never replied, they never gave me any feedback. What happens next, and do you do that? Because as a recruiter and as the hiring company as well, just having a process that you make very clear to your candidates and also doing the things in that process so everybody understands what it is they need to do within that can make a real difference between that, building that trust and building that kind of safety for those candidates as well. So again, it's still around clarity, communication, certainty.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I see that a lot, and I actually experience that, myself being neurodivergent. If things aren't made clear, then you just start worrying. It's just that anxiety that you get. It does put you into that worry mode. Other things as little as for me, if a meeting's called, if just a meeting's called and it's put in the diary and there's no context of what it's about or anything like that, and you're like, it freaks me out. It absolutely freaks me out.
Definitely.
or something. You're like,
yeah,
oh my
absolutely.
God.
And for people who are looking for new jobs, this is quite a stressful time for them. It doesn't,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that they're out of work or anything like that. But if you're considering
Yeah.
a career change, or something, you're maybe looking for something new, it's, it can be quite a lot to process mentally and kind of, as part when you're already in another job or not. So actually, the time when people, they need to feel safe, and they need to feel like they can trust you, or they can trust, the company they're going to go and work with. Because if you can't trust the person, or if you feel like you can't trust the person that's representing you, you're less likely to be able to, as a candidate anyway, less likely to give really give the kind of information that's required, or to feel like you're going to get them the job offer that they kind of need, or the salary that they need, if they're talking about, what kind of salary they want. And the same company, how many companies do you know will say one thing and do another? The world is a place where we've, as neurodivergent people, have kind of learned to be a little bit mistrustful of things, because some of it doesn't make sense to how our brains work. So just building in that sort of safety and trust aspect through really good communication and clarity is super important, and all stages of that hiring process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it kind of brings me to the next point. But I think it's been in the next point of what I wanted to say is, how do we, as professionals, individuals, managers, leaders, employees, whichever, how do you deal, effectively with that, with that overwhelmness? And personally, I think, again, it's that clarity, it's that communication, but it's also being invested in, what you say you are, and, your, kind of partnerships. Because it's one thing, hiring for people and bringing them into your organization, but also I think that goes a bit further in, the people that are already in your organization that are misdiagnosed and that may be going through that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Whole thing of, say what you mean, do what you do.
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
And be dedicated to, what you say you are dedicated to as a business. And that is, your people.
Yeah. Do you know what? Your team or your staff don't, or your new employees or your existing employees don't have any, there's no, they don't have to disclose that they're neurodivergent. It's not something that they have to disclose. And in the same way that, it's the same with any kind of disability, really, in many cases, you don't, there's no kind of like pressure for them to do that. It's not an absolute necessity, especially when it's ADHD or autism or something like that. But you are not going to be able to help them if they don't feel psychologically safe enough to kind of tell at least the HR team or whoever it is they're working closely with about that neurodivergence. There's no way that any reasonable adjustments can be put in place. There's no way that anyone's going to understand them or be able to kind of level that playing field a little bit if the psychological safety of being able to open up about that in that work environment isn't there. And, companies, so they don't, your employees don't owe it to you to tell you, but actually companies do owe it to their staff to be able to create this culture of psychological safety. And that is, some of that comes through educating themselves and actually being kind of open and aware of what neurodivergence is. So what different kind of, how that can present in different ways, other disabilities as well, being very kind of open and open to education. So getting people in, I go into companies and I give talks and I train people on it, because it's one thing to kind of go and look at an article on TikTok or something on TikTok or, and think, oh, well, that's, somebody might be ADHD or that's what it means. But, companies really need to find out exactly what it is, what it means, what kind of reasonable adjustments and things can really make a massive difference for their teams, to level that playing field, to provide equity for those people, really. And that is an education piece, because everybody with everybody who's neurodivergent can have different kind of presentation of it. One person might be very affected by the position of their desk, for example. They might really thrive with a quiet desk, away from the stream of people going past, noise cancelling headphones, all that stuff. other neurodivergent people might actually, that might be the worst thing for them. It might completely trigger them and make them feel really cut off and disconnected. You know, they might need something very different. So for the company, understanding that there are all of these different ways, there's not a one size fits all, you know, is really, really important. And then really looking at what tools there are available. There's lots of adaptive software that can help with focus and some of these executive function challenges. But it's not just on the company. You as a neurodivergent person, whether you're going to a new company or you've just been diagnosed or you're self-realized, or, you know, you need to understand what your particular flavor of neurodivergence looks like. So we have to, as individuals, educate ourselves and develop that understanding ourselves of what's going on for us, what do we need, because we can't walk into somewhere and you know, our work and say, well, you should know what I need. Sometimes it's, you know, yes, they should, but, you know, there's a lot of times that the companies won't have that skill or that knowledge. So we have to kind of learn to advocate. Sadly, we have to learn to advocate for ourselves in a work environment. The dream situation is you go in, you feel psychologically safe as an employee, you are able to advocate for what you need, and your company is open, responsive, educated, and in a position to be able to give you that. Fantastic. The playing field is leveled. It doesn't, you know, you're going to get a much happier, more productive, you know, employee with longevity than they are if actually you have no idea what's going on and you don't know what you need, and they don't think that ADHD is a real thing or whatever, and they can't, you know, they're not prepared to even talk about it. And there are still companies out there and managers out there that are like, so it's there's a bit on both sides, but I think creating the environment and the culture within an organization of this idea of psychological safety, where people feel okay to be, you know, it doesn't have to be public knowledge in the company, but if you feel okay that you can tell the HR team, you can tell your direct manager, it means they can support you. Whereby if you don't tell them, it's going to be very difficult to you know, identify and then therefore give you what you need to level that playing field and bring that equity into your job role. So I felt that was a really long answer there to that question.
No, it's fine. No, it's fine. I think, you know, ultimately, it's like you just said, I think the bottom, you know, the top and bottom of it for me is, you know, it's saying one thing and then doing another. And I think, you know, the people that, you know, kind of market it well, you know, make it known in their organization, they're an advocate of it, you know, they accept it, they're invested in it, you know, the ones that actually follow that through, you know, hats off to you, you know, but it's the ones, you know, that don't, and then neurodiverse people, you know, get lost and then they end up leaving, and it's just that experience for them, you know, just isn't very nice. And I think the what you just said about the one size fits all, you know, I'm neurodiverse, I've got, you know, kind of friends, I've got, you know, some family as well, and, you know, how I react to some things is totally different to how they do. You know, how I take in information, you know, I have to, it's not a weakness, you know, I'm proud, you know, I wouldn't be where I am if I didn't have my ADHD, you know, if I didn't have my neurodiverse, I'm proud of it, I love it. But, you know, there is certain challenges, and, you know, you just have to, you know, you just have to get some appreciation and some acceptance, you know, for that. But I might be, you know, doing it in a neurodiverse moment quite right here, right now, by kind of going off a little bit, but I'll bring myself back in. You know, what I was getting at then is, you know, how I take information in, you know, so I can't be, you know, kind of burnt out too much, you know, too much is too much, you know, and things have to be, you know, kind of broken down, you know, a little bit to kind of take it in and then think, okay, what do I do next with it? You know, it's that clarity. If that clarity isn't there, you know, I'll totally freak, you know, and then I'll burn and that'll be it. So, but somebody else, you know, might not be to the extent of that. So you can't just say, okay, this is exactly how we're going to deal with neurodiversity. Everybody is the same, and, you know, kind of like it or lump it sort of thing. You know, you've got to be, all triggers, you know, are different for everybody, not one size fits all. So I think, you know, as an organization, you know, be strong, you know, be bold with your clarity, be, have great communication, you know, with it, really, truly invest in it, you know, so that, you know, you can tap in to, you know, some fantastic talent, because, you know, for leadership, I was talking to a candidate, you know, about 2 hours ago, you know, and he said the leadership team were all neurodiverse, you know, all of them. It dealt with in the right way, you know, innovative companies that want to stay ahead of the curve, want to be 10 steps ahead. You know, if you can really invest and get clarity, have great communication, you know, bring people in. I'm a massive, massive fan of that, Abi.
Yeah.
It's bring people into your organization, you know, invest in it as well. Bring bring leaders in, bring coaches in to mix with your leaders, you know, really build, you know, like a bit of a community within your organization where, you know, your current neurodiverse talent, you know, can see just how passionate you are about it, so that they don't have too much overwhelm. You know, they feel supported, they can come to you, because if not, you know, they're just not going to be productive. And then they're going to be constantly lost in their career due to no fault of their own. It's just going to be because, you know, that they're not, you know, that they're not managed in the right way.
And you know what? There's a huge financial implication for that as well for companies. If there's a high turnover of staff, if they lose, you know, valuable members of the team, you know, I've experienced it myself in an employed job a few years ago, where absolutely I left because I was just had no idea how to manage somebody who is neurodivergent, and also I had no idea I was neurodivergent. I just thought I couldn't do the job, and you know, the management was terrible. It was just one of those where actually. I could have been really successful in that job, and there's other people that's happened to within the same company.
Absolutely.
You know, and if you're building a culture where, you know, somebody's applying for a job at this company and they look on LinkedIn and they think, well, why is all their staff staying for 3 months and then leaving? That company is not, that organization is not going to get the best talent apply for them, because they're going to take one look at it and go, okay, so their top 3 people have all left after 3 months, or they've hired somebody else, or they're hiring again, or there's that job advert again. You know, it's like, okay, so, you know, the best candidates are not stupid. They will see that if you've got that kind of culture in your organization. So it kind of, you know, and it's going to cost you money as a company. The productivity of, you know, people will be off sick. It's that there's a lot of companies that have this kind of culture of sickness and turnover and things not going well. And they are going to, that financial implication for that is going to affect them hugely.
Literally. Well, interestingly, just the last question, as we're going to have to wrap up shortly, Abi. But the last thing that we talked about retention. You know, as a founder, you know, of a talent acquisition, you know, agency, you know, we also offer HR now with our service, just for that alone, in the fact that, you know, retention is a big thing. It's huge. And what we try to do is to do the people, you know, kind of people side. So not only is it about hiring for me as a founder of Key Global Recruitment, it's absolutely not, you know, that's, you know, a fraction of what we do. But for me, I want to make sure that the talent that we put in, neurodiverse or not, that we work with their people team and we understand, you know, what the next 5 years looks like for that candidate. You know, how are they going to be managed? How are they going to be, you know, pushed and developed, etc.? What's in place from a performance, you know, kind of check, etc. And also not just that, there's so many legislations that are changing on a month to month, you know, year to year basis and things like that. But, you know, like I say, you know, for me, it's about seeing people thrive, you know, within an organization and have the opportunity to, you know, be progressed, you know, and really develop and be a key part of that success. So, you know, offering, you know, the combined HR and recruitment service, we really, you know, get hold of that person within, you know, within the organizations that we work with. And it's a joint effort to really make sure that those people, you know, are set up for success, basically. You know, and we work with their people teams to understand, you know, to make sure that retention is kept at a high, and that they have, you know, a good people department, and the people are going to get handled to, you know, to a high standard.
Yeah, it's really important. I think there has definitely been a shift in many organizations towards this kind of employee experience, as well as, you know, not so I mean, I've seen it myself. These are people that hire me to come and do stuff. You know, there is definitely been a shift within many of the bigger companies. You know, some of the larger companies like Microsoft and those kind of people have specific neurodivergent talent, you know, kind of campaigns that they run for hiring. So there has definitely been a shift. I think some of the smaller organizations sometimes, I think, struggle with that, struggle with, you know, having the resource of time and budget and everything to do it. But I don't think it doesn't have to cost a lot of money, having this kind of knowledge.
I was going to say, there's, you know, there is things, you know, there's got to be people that, you know, things like that you could, you know, kind of bring into the organization. You could do things out of the organization. There's plenty of things that you could do if you wanted to be really, really good at this. You know, if you truly were passionate about it, there is so many things that you could do. There is nothing stopping anybody from achieving anything. And if you're an organization that wants to, you know, be really passionate about this area and really give a shit, you can do something about it. You know, you can bring other people in, you know, you can create a safe space, you know, space. You can, you know, build a community, you know, promote people, you know, do things, you know, kind of outside of, there is loads and loads of things that you could do that would cost relatively not much to become good at this. Absolutely.
It just starts with educating themselves, educating the, you know, management teams, and educating yourself as well as an individual, either neurodivergent or not.
Ladies, can I just say that was been a riveting talk. I've been sitting there nodding away and all the rest of it. Being neurodivergent myself, I absolutely appreciate some of the points you've been making. Abby, right on the money, absolutely. And Lauren, nurturing, everything about nurturing. Far more expensive for companies to hire new than it would be to hang on to really good old people that have been misunderstood, and it happens so often. I want to, at this stage, draw the attention. I hope you've noticed I put a ticker at the bottom because I wanted people to understand what Abi Lemon really can bring to the table. But I also want to talk a little bit about key global recruitment. Now, key global recruitment, which I've now put a new ticker up, as you can see at the bottom, that's keyglobalrecruitment.com. It's Lauren Halket's brainchild, and the whole point about it is finding the right people who are not necessarily in the neurodiverse recruitment community, but are out there, and fit them into jobs where they can flourish. Incredible stuff. Well, Lauren, would you tell me briefly why key global recruitment is such a game changer?
I think I've just said that there, is that, you know, it's not about putting bums on seats. You know, we're not a CV vending machine. You know, it's not a simple transaction for me. Those days, you know, have gone, I think, in recruitment. That was an old service that I think shouldn't be around anymore. You know, we're not an O2 call center. You know, people, you know, for me, people moving jobs is a big deal. You know, it's a massive thing. You know, it's a big change, not for them just, but for their family and things like that. It could take them, you know, they could have to relocate to a different, you know, there's so many things. So, you know, as an agency, you want to be, you know, as consultative and as partnership led as you possibly can be, so that, you know, they have the best chance of being with the best organization.
Exactly.
And landing the best job. But the other thing is, you know, we don't just, you know, hire, you know, we don't just find the person. That's a small part of kind of what we do. It doesn't just stop there. You know, we want to see them flourish. So therefore we have a people director within our organization now called Nicola, and she, you know, we both work with the client, but Nicola, you know, heavily will work with the client after from a HR perspective to make sure that, you know, they are set up in terms of, you know, performance management. They're onboarded to the best, you know, to the best degree, so that they really can, you know, thrive, you know, and survive. So combined HR with talent is a bit of a game changer.
Yeah, absolutely, because I think it means that not only you bring somebody on board, but you're making sure that their journey goes right. I know the J word. I apologize for using the J word.
Yeah,
but
and also to make sure that they are, you know, aligned with the company's culture. And, you know, there's one thing, you know, when you get hired, because you know, you might have limited time because you've got this job, you know, you've got 10 job postings, 10 job applications. But actually, when you get in, then, you know, you've got to make sure that you really connect with the team. You've got to make sure that the first year you pass your probation, you know, then you start looking at, okay, well, where can I move? Where can I go to? Where are the heights within this organization? And what is the next step up? So if we work with a lot of, you know, we work with SMEs and things like that. So typically some of those people don't have HR functions at all. So that bit after, when they get in there, to make them feel solid and safe, if there isn't a HR function within the organization, then, you know, they could quite easily get lost once we've put them in that organization. So that's the reason why we, you know, kind of offer that. But also some organizations may have a HR department, but, you know, they might not, you know, have that time to really, you know, bed, you know, kind of our people in, because they're tied up in so many other, you know, kind of projects. So even if somebody does have a HR organization, the fact that we can bring that as a talent acquisition partner, you know, really helps, because we can work with their team to
I totally get it.
To make sure that, you know, the people that we put in, you know, are culturally aligned. They're constantly being, you know, reviewed on their performance within the organization. And if there is anything to pick up, then we can pick that up from a partnership.
Look, all it remains for me to do is to thank Lauren, whose brainchild this is in the first place. Thank you so much. And Abi, what a breath of fresh air. Excellent work there. Thank you so much. To all of you watching, if you want to start your recruitment journey, or if you just want to have a conversation with a switched on neurodiverse person, see the QR code in the corner. Don't hesitate to use that. And remember, Abi Lemon, my gosh, I've just made you global there. Abi Lemon, of course, is available, I'm sure, for an initial consultation where she'll talk you through what can be achieved. So until next time, thank you all for watching. Try and keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and remember, look after that mental health. Bye-bye now.
We're here to build your dream team, building futures, that's our theme.